definition of health, according to the World Health Organization at least, is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. I like this definition of health, because we shouldn't just focus on not being ill, but rather on being well. However, through my experiences inside and outside the classroom, I've noticed that for some reason, this definition gets modified when it comes to mental health. To prepare for this talk, I decided to conduct a mini investigation. I created 2 one-question surveys that some of you in the audience may have answered. The questions were simple and direct. I asked my peers through an anonymous survey to tell me which 5 words first came to mind when they heard or read the word health. I then did the same, but with the phrase mental health. These were the results for the first survey. There are a few things to note here. First, I noticed that nearly all the words related to the word health have a pretty positive connotation, such as exercise, food, and doctor. Even happy shows up as the 5th most common word. On the other hand, most of the words people associated to the phrase mental health have a much more negative connotation. As you can see from the word cloud, depression was by far the most common word, showing up in 1/3 of all responses, followed by the words stigma and crazy. So what does this tell us about our perception of mental health? In my opinion, these word clouds show exactly the discrepancy in the way we conceptualize physical health and mental health. Now, if you look at the word clouds even closer, you can see that there's a greater variety of responses in the mental health survey than that for just health. This isn't attributed to the fact that there were more responses for the health survey than that for just mental health, but rather shows that more people think of the same words when it comes to health than they do for mental health. This shows exactly how complex and misunderstood mental health is. Now, one could argue that many things in the world are complex and misunderstood, like chemistry. So why is this different? Or rather, why is this important? Why does this matter? Well, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, intentional self-harm or suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. However, in the age groups of 10 to 24, suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death. And among 25 to 34-year-olds, suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death in the United States. This means that more young people are dying due to mental illness than they are from diseases like cancer. It's also important to remember that these are the people that unfortunately died by suicide. These numbers don't reflect the thousands of people who struggle with suicidal thoughts and mental illness. While data is crucial to our understanding of the magnitude of the problem, it can often detract from the humanity of the issue. We cannot forget that these numbers represent thousands of sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters. This is my sister, Victoria. This is a picture of us from this past summer on a trip to Disneyland for her 18th birthday. About 3 years ago, I thought she would never live to see this day. My sister, like many thousands of teenagers, said, "I've had enough," and tried to end her life. It's a blessing that she did not succeed in her attempts, but these signaled that she was seriously ill. For the past 3 years, my family and I have done everything we possibly could to help my sister. And while there's still work to be done, I'm happy to say that she's slowly healing. And I am too. As some of you may have experienced, it's extremely difficult to care for yourself when someone you love is sick. During my freshman year at Tufts, even though I was far away from my sister, she was all I could think about. I lived every day in fear that I might receive that phone call I never want to receive. I was dealing with the typical first semester struggles, but no more than my friends were. However, having my sister be sick thousands of miles away left me feeling helpless. I was extremely unhappy. I dedicated most of my free time to academics, and I joined the Tufts marathon team for fun, but it quickly became my excuse to avoid socializing since I had to be up early to run. I thought that if I kept my body and mind busy, the pain would eventually go away. but it didn't. Unfortunately, as I learned, that's not how real emotions work. You simply feel what you feel. I acted happy in hopes that I would also feel happy, but I couldn't. I was depressed. So why didn't I do something? Interestingly enough, the answer to this question came to me right in the middle of a hot yoga class. Yoga encourages you to challenge yourself, but never to push it to a point of pain or discomfort. Yoga teaches you to listen to your body, and if it poses ever too much, to ease out of it. So why didn't I give myself a break? Why didn't I go home for the semester to deal with all the emotional pain? Why didn't I ease out of the overwhelming situation I was in? The truth is, I thought I didn't have a good enough reason. I thought that I was being dramatic and letting the situation get to me, and I needed to push through, be strong. In my mind at the time, emotion equaled weakness. Emotion equaled irrationality. Succumbing to my emotions was absolutely out of the question. Vulnerability was out of the question. Plus, I didn't have any real problems. I have a loving family, supportive friends, a fantastic education, physical health. I had everything. I'm really lucky. Growing up, I listened to a lot of Britney Spears. And while I may admit that most of her songs may seem cliche and trivial, it wasn't until recently that I realized that one of her songs actually speaks to something really important. In 2000, Britney released the song Lucky. For those of you who live under a rock and don't know the lyrics, in the song, Britney talks about a girl who has everything. Yet she sings, "If there's nothing missing in her life, then why do these tears come at night?" In all seriousness, I think that what Britney Spears is referencing here is crucial to our understanding of mental illness and mental health. The idea that someone could be depressed even though their life is perfect is something I could not wrap my head around until I felt it myself. I always thought that depression had a clear and legitimate catalyst. And as a result, I thought that people who had everything and had no real problems but still struggled with depression were simply being weak. This is why I didn't want to go home that semester. I was afraid of being judged, afraid of seeming weak. This again goes back to the word clouds and the discrepancy in the way we conceptualize physical health versus mental health. If I had torn my ACL, for example, and told my friends I needed to go home for a week to have my mom comfort and spoil me, no one would have questioned it. However, if I had said I needed to go home for a week because I felt sad, this might have raised some eyebrows. But why? Why do we treat physical health and mental health so differently? At first, I thought this was mainly attributed to the fact that, for the most part, mental illness can't be seen, making it hard to understand, which in turn causes us to react differently towards it. However, many other illnesses and injuries are like that as well. Going back to the torn ACL example, no one has X-ray vision. No one can actually see a torn ACL, yet no one questions its existence. This is when I realized that's not the invisibility of mental illness that causes this discrepancy, but rather it is stigma that does. People readily accept the validity of physical conditions, yet we are averse to mental illness. Physical illness often doesn't require an explanation, but through my experience with depression, I often felt pressure to explain and justify why I wasn't always happy, yet I was still too scared to reveal my condition. A few weeks ago, I talked to one of my sister's former therapists, Ryan Pepper, to discuss this talk and the issue of mental health. He explained to me that mental illness carries a lot of stigma, mostly because we as a society, we as people, struggle to fully understand it. We struggle to understand it in others, but we also struggle to understand it within ourselves. Through my period of depression, I often found it really difficult to know exactly what I was feeling. All I knew is that it felt uncomfortable and foreign. Mental illness feels uncomfortable and foreign. And as a result, we choose not to talk about it. But from this very silence, judgment and stigma arise. Depression, crazy, and stigma were the 3 most common words in the mental health survey. And while these 3 words embody the current problem, I can also see some solutions. Stigma was the 2nd most common word, which means people are aware of the issue, which also means that together we can begin to destigmatize mental illness. Although not an easy task, I learned it doesn't take much to start making a difference. While talking to my sister's therapist, I asked him how. How do we begin to destigmatize mental illness? He simply said, through acceptance. Acceptance with a capital A. Acceptance without judgment. Acceptance with kindness. Knowing that someone fighting anxiety isn't crazy. That someone dealing with depression is no different from someone dealing with diabetes. If mental conditions were accepted, people could stop hiding. It would allow us to be imperfect, to be human, because a lot more people struggle with mental illness than we think. In fact, research shows that 25% of US adults have a mental illness, and that nearly 50% of US adults will develop at least one mental illness during their lifetime. This means that nearly half of us in this room have or will struggle with our mental health at some point in our lives. But it doesn't have to be that way. Prevention. We need to start caring more about prevention. Currently, it seems to me that we think that the only people who should be concerned with their mental health, are the mentally ill. But that's not the case. 50% of US adults will develop at least one mental illness in their lifetime. It is imperative that we start talking about mental health in terms of mental well-being as opposed to mental illness, because we cannot wait until it's too late. You will not wait for your diabetes to be killing you to treat it, right? So why do we let depression get to that point? This current downstream approach is costing us hundreds of thousands of lives. I almost lost my sister. We must prevent mental illness. And in order to do this successfully, we must destigmatize it. We must be kind to ourselves. If you have one of these, then you also have a mental well-being to care for. The fight against mental illness should be a conversation between all people, not just the mentally ill and their physicians. People dealing with mental illness shouldn't be the other, because it can happen to anyone. It happened to my sister. It happened to me. It can happen to you. If health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, then we are not healthy unless our minds are. If a person is composed of mind, body, and spirit, let's strive to be healthy people, not just healthy bodies. Thank you.